Thank you for joining us virtually at our panel discussion, Bridging the Science Policy Gap for Impactful Demand-Driven Food Systems Innovation. We're excited to have this panel today. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm going to hand it over now to Maria Zuber, the Vice President for Research at MIT and co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, for some welcome remarks. Maria, to you.
Great, thank you, Greg. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for being here. Let me start by thanking our co-organizers, Columbia University, the American University of Beirut, and CCATS. It's an honor to join these partners to host this important conversation. Through research, education, and outreach, MIT is committed to doing its part to accelerate solutions to the climate crisis. We're focused on helping the world deploy existing solutions as rapidly as possible in order to achieve deep emissions reductions, while in parallel developing innovations that will get us all the way to net zero by mid-century. And we're focused on helping to prepare for and manage the climate impacts that are inevitable. So today we'll be talking about food systems, which include everything from food production to processing, transport, consumption, and disposal. And at the core of today's discussion are two basic truths. One, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from food systems is essential if we want to achieve global climate goals. And two, achieving global climate goals is essential if we want to prevent serious and intensifying disruptions to our food supply. Food systems are responsible for approximately 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. These emissions alone could push the increase in global average temperature past 2 degrees C. At the same time, food systems are extremely vulnerable to impacts of rising temperatures. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that warming of 2 degrees C could trigger a global food crisis, which among other things would make it harder for us to reduce hunger. We are well behind the curve in terms of transforming our food systems to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and make them more resilient to climate change, but there's time to change that. One way we can make our food systems more sustainable and resilient is to ensure that new ideas emerging from research universities and laboratories can lead to real change. We need research that's informed by the needs and values of food system stakeholders, and we need to be able to translate research findings into new public policies, business processes, industry standards, or farming practices. Today, however, food systems research is often not well connected to policy and practice. Strengthening this connection is the goal of the Food and Climate Systems Transformation Alliance, or FACT Alliance, which MIT's Abdul Latif Jameel Water and Food Systems Lab is formally launching with this event here today at COP26. The FACT Alliance is a global network of 16 leading research institutions and a growing network of stakeholder organizations with the mission of catalyzing collaborative, actionable research. Alliance members are leaders in fields that span the entire global food system from farm to table and beyond. And today, you'll hear from FACT Alliance members about what we can do to address specific challenges that limit real-world relevance and usefulness of food and climate research. They'll discuss how, but by designing research projects that cut across disciplinary boundaries, reflect real dialogue with food system practitioners, and provide results that can be put into action, we can close the gap between research and practice. Food systems innovation is a key part of comprehensive action to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and follow-on commitments made here at COP26. And the FACT Alliance stands ready to help drive meaningful, lasting food systems innovation informed by the best available science. So I'll close by thanking our distinguished panelists for offering their perspectives today. And to introduce them, I'd like to turn now back to Greg Sixt, Director of the FACT Alliance and the Research Manager for Climate and Food Systems at the Abdul Latif Jameel Water and Food Systems Lab at MIT. Greg, back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. I'd now like to introduce Professor Pete Smith from University of Aberdeen and from the FACT Alliance for our keynote speech. Pete?
Thanks very much, Greg. Can we have the slides, please? So what I'm going to do today is outline why we need co-designed solutions and why we need to address the food system transformation, because it is not fit for purpose as it currently stands. When we look at the food system, it's really complex. So we tend to see in agricultural universities and life science universities, we maybe have funded work on food production in the past. We've maybe looked at some of the environmental impacts, and maybe we've looked at some of the things affecting food production. But the food system is complex. It revolves around food availability, and that's production, distribution, and exchange, food access, and food utilization. So it really requires a multidisciplinary approach to tackle the problems that are within the food system as it currently stands. When we look at the food system, the reason I say broken food system is because we don't have a food system that delivers what we need it to for the global population. This is the World Food Programme's World Hunger Map from 2021, and you can see that up to over 800 million people, that's 1 in 10 people on the planet, do not get enough to eat. And that is despite us growing enough food on the planet to feed everyone. So this isn't entirely a food production issue, it's a distribution and economics issue, an economic access issue. We also have very uneven access to safe and nutritious food. These are just two visual examples of that. This is two families, one in Chad and one in Germany, and this is the food that they receive over the same time period, and you can see that we have very uneven distribution to safe and nutritious food that we have access to. And that leads us to the other issue, that it's not only undernutrition and hunger that we have to address. We have an increasing problem of obesity. So over 39% of all adults in the world are overweight, and 13% of adults in the world are classed as obese. So we really have the dual problems of overnutrition of some of the population, undernutrition of some of the population, and all of this within the broken global food system. In addition to that, our food system is responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, global greenhouse gas emissions, most of those from production and land use change as a result of clearance of land for agriculture. Those two accounting for up to 70% of those greenhouse gas emissions from the food system. Not only is it a big emitter of greenhouse gases, it uses 70% of fresh water, all fresh water use on Earth. 70% of it is used in agriculture. And we have the additional challenge of it being a primary driver of biodiversity loss, with agriculture alone being identified as a threat to 24,000 of the 28,000 species that are at risk of extinction. So we have a real big problem. So the reason we're discussing this at COP is because there's an interaction between climate change and the food system. Firstly, through the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted from the food system, and secondly, because of the interactive effects of climate change on the global food system. We have losses in production from climate change, which means that we need to intensify agricultural production, which leads to further environmental degradation and a loss of productivity. So in short, we need safe and nutritious food for all. We need a reduced contribution to climate change. We need our food system to be resilient to climate change. And we also need to reduce the wider environmental impacts that I spoke about earlier, such as biodiversity and water. The food system transformation is needed, and what it needs to be is effective. In other words, that must deliver nutrition for all with reduced environmental impact and more resilience. It needs to be practical. We must be able to implement it and practically on the ground, and it must be deliverable, which means that we're able to develop policies that can deliver it. But all of these different impacts, the effect, the effectiveness, the practicality, and the deliverability is delivered by different stakeholders. So we have a bunch of food system stakeholders, researchers, international research centres, civil society groups, NGOs, development organisations are involved in developing what's an effective food system. To make it practical, we need to speak to farmers, land managers, supply chain actors, industry, retailers, and NGOs, and it has to be deliverable. And that's largely the job of policymakers, governments, but also the funders of the science and the research. The conventional approach to research has been fairly one which involves stakeholders, but fairly at arm's length. We tend to work in silos in the research community. We interact loosely with stakeholders, and we tend to deliver information to them rather than have them co-deliver the work. So what we're proposing in the approach that we need for a food system transformation relies on 4 components. Firstly, we identify the food system vulnerabilities. Then we have to articulate the problem and scope the problem. After that, we can do impact-driven transdisciplinary research. And of course, we need to evaluate the impact to assess whether we're making an impact in the right direction. So in short, each of these, the food system vulnerability modelling, we can use the best science, integrated modelling, to identify the vulnerabilities in the food system and where these are likely to occur in the future and as a result of climate change. And this serves as the primary basis for the engagement of stakeholders. But we really need the stakeholders to help us to identify and articulate the problems and to scope the problems. And this involves stakeholders at just about every stage. So we engage the stakeholders, we identify the opportunities and gaps, we identify the knowledge gaps, and we brainstorm the solutions that we need together. So we don't design the research in isolation of the stakeholders, we design it with them so that it answers the questions that they need to be answered. Component 3 is that we need transdisciplinary research. I've already said that research into food production is not enough. We need multidisciplinary research in all aspects of the food system. So we need stakeholder engagement again, along with the transdisciplinary research. And then we have to investigate the relevance and feasibility. And finally, we have to scale the pathways to impact. And the last component is developing the metrics to evaluate the impact. So we have to be able to measure and to verify that the transformations we make have a positive impact on the outcomes that we're after. And this component 4, is a knowledge gap in itself. So I'll finish by saying that we really need to have co-design solutions. At the bottom of all of this is the need for co-design. Research alone cannot deliver food system transformation. We need a convergence research approach that is needed, that involves various stakeholders throughout the process, a range of stakeholders from farmers, civil society, governments, policymakers, stakeholders, as well as the research community. And co-design is a key element of that research into transforming the food system, because doing research in isolation of all the stakeholders and in isolation of the goals that we want to achieve will not deliver the transformation that we need. The problem's too big for us to solve in isolation, and we need broad alliances to tackle the issue, and that's why we've developed the FACT Alliance. So back to you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. I think one of the elements that you highlighted there as well was the fact that the need to evaluate. We don't have good metrics yet for evaluating transformative systems change. We were very good at looking at kind of individual interventions, but how those pieces connect is really important. Our next speaker joins us virtually. Charlotte Watts is the Chief Scientific Advisor and Director for Research and Evidence in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. She is seconded from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where she's Professor of Social and Mathematical Epidemiology. Charlotte, over to you. Charlotte's joining us virtually, if you can key her in.
She's turned her camera and her microphone off. We're messaging her and she's not responding.
Okay, so we will pivot over right now to Theo de Jager, and we'll come back to you, Charlotte. Theo de Jager, to my left, was elected as president of the World Farmers Organization on June 14th, 2017. Dr. de Jager is the first South African to head the organization and the second African after Dr. Evelyn Nogleka from Zambia. Theo?
Thank you, thank you. The German author Patrick Suskind wrote, "Imagine there's a wall and nobody goes there. Then it will come to you, and you will no longer have the option to choose to take part or where to engage in battle. And every loss will be a loss in your house." As farmers, we understand this very well. We understand that the challenges of climate change, transformation of food systems, is a war which we cannot avoid. And we should rather go there than wait for it on our farms. And this is why we engage on platforms like this. Now, there can be few topics more relevant than the one we discussed today, the gaps between policy and science, because in our minds, the reality of food systems stand on a tripod. On the one leg, you have the policy makers and the policies. On the other leg, you have the scientists. And the third leg is the reality of the food systems. And for us, that reality is on the production side. It's what happens on the farm. On the policy side, it's all about those who create the environment in which the food system needs to be functional. And for us, as farmers, it means the environment in which we can make profit from our businesses in producing food, not only now, but in future years to come, what we call sustainability. On the science leg, it's all about the knowledge, the expertise, the ability to look behind the horizon and to predict what is coming. Scientists work with facts, and facts are independent of us. It's objective. Policymakers do not always work with facts. They would rather work with wisdom, not knowledge, but rather with belief. And when we try to do advocacy in organized agriculture, we try to use the facts to enter the ear of the policymakers, to change policies in such a way that we can maintain our sustainability. On our side in industry, it is all about livelihoods. Agriculture still today is the largest profession, the oldest profession in the world. There are more farmers than any other profession. And today people can be scientists and policymakers and professionals because there are still enough farmers who produce food. So there's no way of thinking that we will transform food systems if we do not start with farmers too, if farmers are not part of this discussion. Now farmers, and I'm so grateful that Professor Smith referred to them on the practical leg, by the very nature of farming, we want to translate things in very practical terms. What does it mean for me on my farm this season? What must I do different? And of course, we accept that if science says we are on the wrong side, then we can waste no time or effort to get on the right side. For this very reason, we have adopted policies not only at the World Farmers Organization level, but also in continental and regional platforms, that our policies must be science-based. This is the only way we can ensure on the longer term that solutions for us will still be solutions in 10 years from now and 20 years and 50 years from now. If it is not science-based, history will judge poorly over us. You see, you cannot influence policy if you do not have policy. And policy is based on consensus. And the farming industry is so diverse. In World Farmers Organization, we represent some of the poorest and the lowest technology farmers, hand-hoe farmers, but we also represent some of the highest technology farmers and super farmers, and everything in between. And to get consensus in such a diverse group is quite a challenge. The only real way to go about it is to let science speak. And very often, it takes a few years, sometimes it even takes a generation or more, to adopt or to adapt to ensure that you are in line with the latest science, the latest knowledge. Our biggest frustration as farmers is that very often science, especially research, falls out of step with the reality on the farm. There is simply too much Socrates paradigm research for knowledge as a virtue. We want to know for the fun of it, rather than research that will help us to maintain our competitiveness where it really matters, where we put the plow in the soil. And for this reason, we are very grateful to be a part of the FACT Alliance. If a fairy would land on my shoulder and give me one wish for this alliance, it would be that this platform will stimulate more discussion, will bring more farmers into laboratories and more scientists on farms and more politicians and policymakers to see what real life is like between scientists and farmers. If we cannot manage to do that, we're not going to transform our food systems.
Thank you, Theo. I couldn't agree more, and we're very happy to have the World Farmers Organization as part of the FACT Alliance. And I think, a key, when we were starting to build this early on, one of the things we heard when we were interacting with stakeholders was a lot of farmers view research as extractive. We come in, we collect our data, we do our research, and then there's the follow-up's not there. And so I think it's really important that we're working together to bring the farmers in the early phase of that. And I think the other key part is, if, with most farmers, you get one chance. If you mess up the program, if what you're working with them on doesn't work, they're risk averse because they have to be. And if you miss that opportunity, that's your one opportunity. So I think engaging them early in the process is extremely important. I just want to check with the AV folks. Have we had any luck with Charlotte?
She's still in the meeting, but her mic and camera are off. I've emailed her, she's not responded.
Okay, I think they said that she can't unmute still. So I'm up here on a panel, so I guess I can't really communicate with her assistant. So we'll keep trying, and we'll bring her in when we get a chance. Forgive me, folks. I've got your bios on my phone, so let me just pull those up. So we'll go now to Diane Holdorf. Diane Holdorf is Managing Director of Food and Nature at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. In this role, she leads business efforts to accelerate the much-needed systems transformation in the areas of food, nature, and water. Diane, over to you.
Thank you so much, Greg, and a huge thanks actually to you and the leaders at MIT for bringing other leading research universities together along with other really key partners, to create this FACT Alliance. As the WBCSD, we're thrilled to be able to be a part of this. And I think it's really appropriate to have been able to come into this conversation at the launch now, following the great grounding in science that Professor Smith started us with, moving then again to the incredible power of the keeping farmers at the center that Theo spoke to about from the World Farmers Organization. Just even having WFO in the starting point of this FACT Alliance demonstrates that it's on a different trajectory than what we've seen in other alliances, because farmers, as Theo, you said so well, sit at the heart of the changes that are going to have to be made to put the science into action on the ground to transform systems. So building on the science and the role of the farmer, coming in now to speak about the role of business, feels like the right level of both direction and contribution to be able to get the FACT Alliance off to an incredibly powerful start. WBCSD has always been focused and grounded in the science, and a big advocate for ensuring that decision-making at the business level is grounded in that science. And that, of course, takes place in any number of spectrums. We're sitting here launching this at the Climate COP, and imagining a world where we can take climate action that is not grounded on science, that has given us the 1.5 target, would make any kind of achievement that we've seen so far completely impossible. Bringing that then to the farm level and to agriculture and the transformations that we need to see there means that having that scientific grounding is even more important. We know that agriculture sits at the heart of making sure that we can have both a net zero and a nature positive future that is addressing the needs of our rural communities and farmers, driving equity along those value chains as well. We know that the science is going to help us get there with the work that we're doing here. So ensuring that business sits at the center is, as I said, something that business highly values. We were fortunate to have a key role in helping mobilize the private sector into the Food Systems Summit, which took place in September of this year, and the pre-summit as well in Rome over the summer. That was the opportunity to craft an intersected narrative of what it's going to actually take to transform the food system. And we saw over 100 different countries coming forward with national pathways that for the first time started to bring integration across their ministries and their agencies and brought multiple stakeholders into the room. We wanted to be sure that business leadership really brought a strong voice to what needed to be achieved there, and we brought real advocacy to the scientific community that was absolutely embedded into the food systems as well. We hosted we hosted 5 private sector guiding group CEO consultations into that Food Systems Summit, where we brought the scientific leaders into the conversation as well to make sure that business leaders understood where we were starting from with starting to make these changes. We know that food is a key pathway to achieve the climate transformation, to achieve a nature positive future, to make sure that we can envision a world where 9+ billion people live well within planetary boundaries. And something like the FACT Alliance is key to making sure that we can deliver that going forward. The level of collaboration that you've brought to this, the level of multi-stakeholder thinking that you've grounded this in, we really, really support and endorse. We're excited, as I said, to be part of it, but we really need to leverage now that collective action into the types of solutions that, as Teo said, help us bring farmers forward into where we know the future needs to go. So as part of Next Steps, we remain incredibly committed. We'll continue to mobilize business leadership into the solutions that come from the FACT Alliance. We're incredibly grateful for these partners and look forward to how we create not just the collaboration, but really actionable projects, building on some of the work that we're already doing together collectively, but turning it into how we create the actual change on the ground that we need so urgently. So WBCSD is fully committed. We're very excited to be part of this and really are excited to have this launch kick us forward to the actions that we all need to take. So Greg, thanks, and back over to you.
Thank you, Diane. We are excited to be working with WBCSD on this. I think one of the key things that is really coming through is the all hands on deck moment here. You know,
Absolutely.
As Pete said, we're behind the curve where we need to be with transforming our food systems, and you don't make those transformations unless you have all the right stakeholders at the table. And so we're looking forward to continuing to work with you. Next up, if just colleagues on the back on the AV side, sorry folks for the technical difficulties here. It can be a little tricky. She's not on? Okay. So we're going to transition now, over to John Furlow. John is the director of the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia University's Climate School, a new school. Prior to coming to IRI, Furlow designed and led the Climate Change Adaptation Program at USAID's Climate Change Office, or U.S. Agency for International Development. So John, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody. It's an honor to be a part of this. The FACT Alliance is very exciting. And both at USAID, when I was at USAID and now that I'm at the IRI, I felt, and both organizations have felt, that research has its most impact when it actually gets used. It has the most value when it gets into general use and has an impact on people's lives and livelihoods. The IRI, where I work now, was created about 25 years ago with the explicit goal of not only doing cutting-edge science, but making sure that it's understandable to decision makers. And so our staff is divided between climate scientists and sectoral scientists working in agriculture and health and finance. And we work in the parts of the world that we were talking about where the people are undernourished. We work in the developing world almost exclusively. And our biggest project right now is called Adapting Agriculture to Climate Today for Tomorrow. And the idea being that if farmers are expected to adapt to longer term changes, they need to be ready for the variability that they're facing right now. And the conditions they face year to year are not the same as they may have experienced 10, 20, 30 years ago. So We try to work through systems that are already in place in countries where we work, try to understand the national goals for agriculture and food security. The Act Today project that I mentioned aims to introduce climate services to support each of the countries where we're working's ambitions on the SDG 2 on food and nutrition. We therefore need to understand what are the systems that are in place to support farmers in the production side of food security and food systems, and then understand how we can feed better climate information into those systems. And it means more than just producing better data. It means making sure that we understand how farmers receive information, what makes sense to them. The way a meteorologist speaks is not the same as the way a farmer speaks. So we try to bring together networks of agriculture extension and other people working in agriculture and civil society with the meteorological agencies that are producing the useful information so that the information flows in ways that make sense to the people who need it most. We try to make sure that there are resources in place for farmers to take advantage of the information. If you get a forecast that is useful, but you can't do anything differently, it's not that helpful. And then last, we try to make sure that the use of the information and support for the ongoing development of this information is embedded in policy so that when our part of the project is over, the change in behavior can persist when we're gone. We do all of this through a capacity building model where we don't deliver information. We try to build the capacity of the producers of information, the meteorological agencies in countries, and those that support the agriculture sector in agriculture ministries, civil society, agriculture extension services, to be able to work together and take advantage of this information. Several people mentioned the need for transdisciplinary approaches. There's a new network within Columbia that I hope that we can feed into FACT that brings together people who have been working on food systems and food security across the university in the humanities, in the physical sciences, in the social sciences, and policy, brings them together and provides a platform through which they can begin working together in a more coordinated fashion. And we're looking forward to connecting that with the broader alliance of FACT. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think one of the questions I want to come back to when we have the Q&A is actually how your work might feed into addressing conditions of uncertainty for climate change and adaptation. So we'll come back to that during the Q&A. We're going to come back to Pete Smith again. I get to actually introduce you this time. Pete Smith is Professor of Soils and Global Change at the Institute of Biological and Environmental Sciences at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, and Science Director of the Scottish Climate Change Centre of Expertise, the Climate X Change.
Yeah, thanks very much, Greg. So I'm a researcher. I love doing research, but I take public money to do that research. So I want that research to be useful. Really, there are people who do science because they want to learn things. They want to increase knowledge. The reason I do research is because ultimately I want it to be useful. So that's why I'm really keen to be involved. Why I'm keen to get stakeholders involved in co-designing that research. Back in the late 1990s was the first time that I was involved in a project where we tried to get stakeholders involved in the project, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster because we went to the stakeholders halfway through the project and we told them what we could do. We told them we can model yield change under climate change, we can model soil carbon change, and maybe one or two other things. And then we asked them, stakeholders, what do you want? They said, what can you tell us about the food quality? What can you tell us about how we can get this food locally? And we had no answers. Our models didn't deal with that. So I was on a very rapid learning curve from that moment on, that first engagement with stakeholders, that I realized we were asking and trying to answer the wrong questions. And since then, I've tried to engage with stakeholders at various levels, from governments through to farmers, to try and get them to co-design the research. And it's been a very steep learning curve for me as well. I think I've learned that we have to help certain groups of stakeholders to frame the questions. A question like, what impact does agriculture have on biodiversity is too big a question. It can't be answered. So we have to hone that down into a finer question which we can answer. So it's partly a result of having to a two-way learning process with the stakeholders to learn to ask questions that we can answer. But the biggest learning process is for us to work out how we can design our research to actually answer a question that's meaningful. So that's why I'm so excited to be involved in the FACTS Alliance. That's why it's so important that we're not just researchers in isolation, that we have inputs from the business community, the farming community, and also funders, so that we can co-design that research together from the very start, so that we can work on questions that make a meaningful difference and that will start to chip away to help us to transform the food system.
Thanks, Pete. You know, that's the story of engaging stakeholders midway through the process is demonstrative of the slide you held up with the silos and the arrows. So we're really happy we've got Charlotte Watts on the call. Charlotte, I already introduced you, so we're going to hand it over to you. Thank you, Charlotte.
Great.
We're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Brilliant. Thanks. And sorry for the technology problems. Really pleased to be here. And just to say, I've been hearing everything, so it's felt like I've just been silent somehow. So I'm pleased I can join the conversation. And I mean, just hearing the last reflections. So I'm an academic seconded into government, and I very much recognize the pictures and the discussions about the historical model of research has been, research for the interest's sake, or, a researcher will think about what's the great science question and try and get funding for it. While we're all very much now moving into the space in this sector and many other sectors, saying how do we forge and support the right partnerships that really mean that we're generating the research and innovation that will translate into impact. And actually, it's my job as Chief Scientific Advisor in FCDO, where we manage significant investments across the climate spectrum. All our ways of working are very much trying to forge those partnerships. I think, coming in with a sort of R&D, science and innovation donor perspective, just a few reflections I wanted to share. I think one is just how this sector, how the issues that we're talking about now have been invested in over time. And we really need much more investment for collaboration and partnerships that will enable us to generate and pull through the solutions that farmers really need. And, we do need to get out into the field as academics. We really do need that discourse. A lot of that investments to really get to the transformation that we need to respond to the challenges that climate change poses is also that we need to make investments at risk. Traditionally, science R&D can be slow. It's not. But if you just look at the challenges that we're facing with the impacts of climate change, if you look at the need for us to develop food systems that protect biodiversity, the range of solutions that we're trying to solve, we also need to think about how can we innovate more, how can we take more risk, and also ensure that we are paying attention to the types of evidence partnership that will pull through promising technologies to ensure they actually deliver impact at scale. If I look at the agricultural R&D landscape, often our innovation approaches, there's lots of great ideas, there's lots of great projects, but often it's been piecemeal. And we've had a fragmentation with different donor countries or research centers supporting different types of innovation, but really haven't moved to that join up in agendas and priorities that we need to really move at pace. I was quite involved in the COVID response and some of the investments around R&D, around new technologies for COVID. And it's striking there how in an emergency that focused minds and really moved the progress and developments very quickly. And we similarly need to be doing that across the climate and innovation space and in agriculture. and ensure that we have the appropriate financial flows to support the combinations of partnerships and research that we need moving forward. And then lastly, just go back to the importance of farmers and farmers' voices, and that they should be at the core of the innovation process. So we really need to prioritize research that responds to the practical needs and challenges that farmers are already facing, and deploy the solutions that work to them. And that's the solutions that may give them better yields, ensure greater resilience, as also potentially to ensure we support greater nutrition and other outcomes. But it very much means that we need to know what works for farmers and scale up technologies quickly. We are very supportive and excited about the range of initiatives in the sector. The Global Action Agenda for Agriculture, Vendor, or Climate Shock is an important part of that, that's bringing together governments, researchers, businesses, and farmers around a common goal of developing more climate resilient, low emission agricultural technologies, and building on the partnerships and business models that we can take that can take these to scale, to make sure that they're the most economically attractive options for farmers, food producers, and consumers by 2030. The Global Action Agenda for Agricultural Innovation will be launched on Nature Day, so on the 6th, and that will enable us to go deeper into what can be done and how we could accelerate the pace of innovation. And what's exciting about this is it will bring together over 150 government and non-state stakeholders to this alliance, agree research priorities, and have a commitment to scale up effective innovation so that we can really have a significant impact.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think, one of the points that you brought up was, needing to invest in riskier research, right? The need to take a chance. I mean, I think oftentimes with, be it research or with, global development, we invest in projects that are easy to measure. It's easier to say we built the series of check dams, and we built the small canal at the end of this 5-year project, and there you can measure it. It's harder to say we invested in the long-term change that needs to happen to adapt and become resilient, and to be, to make food systems more mitigating to climate change. I'm actually going to ask you the first question. We're going to open this up to the online audience and to questions here. So Charlotte, to you, what do you think research to action collaboration looks like, in particular in the shift towards more sustainable food systems? And if you have any examples of successful collaborations in the UK or elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a number of elements to that successful collaboration. Some of that I think we've already covered. It is really how do we bring together the right partnerships, the right conversations, really look seriously at who sets the agenda, who poses the question, and then how do we really make the links that were in in Pete's figure work effectively. As a donor, and I would say this as a donor, I think it's also that donors have to be part of that conversation and part of that solution. So also ensuring that we are investing and supporting risk, we are supporting partnerships, we are encouraging risk, we are encouraging innovation, and ensuring that the range of voices that need to be part of this, farmers, poor farmers, female farmers, disenfranchised groups from around the world, we're understanding and get a sense of what those challenges and priorities are, and ensuring that the research does respond to the needs. I mean, to give you some of examples from our own research portfolio, we've been investing in agricultural R&D and innovation for a number of years, and invested significantly for a long time, but are adapting our portfolio to really try and respond to the challenges of climate change and the need to protect biodiversity. But for example, some of our work that we've done with the CG Centre on Climate Resilient Crop Varieties has created far greater resilience. So for example, in Ethiopia, 70% of rural households have now access to some of the resilient crop varieties that we've been investing in. And you know, particularly through the types of partnerships we've supported, we're seeing quite substantial adaptation amongst smallholders and poor households and young and female farmers. So it's not only technologies that the bigger farmers and food producers can use, but also that we're ensuring that the smallest and most marginalized farming communities can access those technologies. Another area, as an example, is some of the work that we've supported in Nigeria has developed simple, cheap biocontrol technologies to try and tackle killer molds in crops. And in that case, again, that some of the product that developed resulted in an increase in smallholders' net income from maize production. And since then, we've seen that approach being replicated and scaled up in a number of countries across sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that you know, an important aspect that we learn from this is how do we achieve that pull-through? How do we ensure equity of access and access to the most vulnerable, but also how do we think about how we ensure replication between countries? Often when I look at some of the successes, they've been adopted in one country, but it's not translating to the next country or been adapted for the next country. So those challenges of scale between countries is one I think in future agendas we need to pay a lot of attention to.
I actually want to ask a follow-up on that. How do you think we can mobilize resources to address that scalability or address that, you know, ability to learn lessons from one place and apply them in a place? Obviously, place-specific challenges exist, but you know, how can we do what you said we should move towards?
I mean, I do when I think about some of the challenges in the way that we think about the science we develop. It's thinking about the broader applicability of some of the developments. I think it's also kind of bringing in much more explicit thinking of what works where. You know, what may be the settings where actually this might be somewhat transferable with minimal modification, what might be others where you need something that's quite different. But also there's an important element of how do you, through global partnerships, through effective exchange, actually ensure that as we're conducting the research, we have partnerships across a range of geographies. So we're trying to learn a range of things at the same time because we're working in a number of different contexts and engaging with the key stakeholders and communities in those diverse geographies. And I think some of the larger research partnerships that we're seeing now and the range of countries now being involved in this important agenda is creating more of that opportunity to try and think and learn and expand at pace across multiple geographies.
Great, thank you. So kind of really building those multi-stakeholder partnerships and collaborations across a wider area. Well, we're on the topic of farmers. Teo, I have a question for you. How can we support farmers to be food systems innovators? So, you know, do farmers have a role in bridging the science policy divide? And if, you know, how can we really leverage the knowledge of farmers for driving innovations in food systems, I guess is kind of my question.
For sure, farmers can play a role here. Farmers are not scientists, but farmers must apply science every day. The world became a very small place for farmers. Every farmer is every day in competition with the best other farmers in the world. And food and fiber flows across borders as if they are not there. And if there's a surplus in one part of the world and a shortage on the other, it will find its way, or else hungry people will find their way to where the food is. We are seeing right now, again, in the aftermath of COVID, that nothing stops hungry people. Most important is that science and policies must make sense to farmers. Even though we do not need to understand exactly how the nuts and bolts fit together, it's important that in the whole, it must make sense. I remember when we first had this discussion about 3 years ago in the UN Climate Summit in New York. In one presentation, it was said that we need to take an area of the world about the size of Latin America out of production and return it to nature. We need to urgently stop deforestation. We need to reduce our use of fertilizers by about 50%. Stop using pesticides and herbicides. And by the way, we also need to feed 2 billion more people in the next few years. Now, the numbers do not add up when you take it to farmers. We don't know how to do that. Or, policymakers in the Netherlands have very recently committed to reduce the national herd of cattle with 50% by 2030. Now, the Dutch are the kings of dairy. Dutch cattle produce more or less 35 liters of milk per day. But they said, when they announced this commitment, that they understand elsewhere in the world, especially in Africa, and they mentioned Ethiopia, we might need to actually increase the number of cattle. Now, the average cow in Ethiopia produces less than 1 liter of milk per day. We want to reduce the most efficient cattle in the world and increase the numbers of the least efficient cattle in the world. It does not make sense. If you would ask a farmer about this, he would say the logic is to bring more of those efficient cattle into Ethiopia, where if they need 100 liters of milk in a specific community in a day, you can either produce it with 3 Dutch cattle or with 110 Ethiopian cattle. So bring some of those Dutch cattle into Ethiopia. That does not happen. Because in Ethiopia, there is not a policy environment which is conducive to investments. So the Dutch would probably not invest in the kind of dairies which we see in the Netherlands to bring it to Ethiopia. It's very important that we convey the message in a way which farmers will understand, but also take ownership of it. They must feel, I need to be part of getting this done. Or else they will just stand back and go about their lives as they've always done, and we will struggle to change mindsets forever. So when we talk about scientists and their role in it, we do not only talk about agricultural scientists, natural scientists, but also social scientists and communication scientists. This must be an effort of scientists across the spectrum to address the issue amongst policymakers across the spectrum so that we can get changes on farms across the whole spectrum.
Thank you. I think you made a really good point. I actually want to open a broader question. First of all, any panelist, if you want to follow up to any individual's question that someone was asked, please feel free. But I think your comments kind of open up a broader question for everyone. So how can we make sure research and innovation are informed by the needs of farmers, farming communities, consumers, policymakers, essentially? And how do we start to integrate the systems, the needs of stakeholders across food systems into innovation, into developing solutions? So I'll open that to anyone who wants to. Diane?
Greg, maybe I'll start. The first thing that comes to me is we need the types of alliances that we're here to launch today. So the whole purpose, as I understand it, of bringing our FACT Alliance together is to create the space within which we bring forward the science and the opportunities with the expectations and requirements and practical application opportunities as well as limitations of farmers and farmer communities, and bring the business value chains to bear to help create some of that business model shift that we're talking about. You know, the example you just shared, Teo, at a policy level is completely unmanageable. If there were business value chains that could shift that and work with governments to create that enabling policy environment, but more importantly, rebuild those supply chains, it wouldn't be quite so impossible. And that's where we have these opportunities to really link this up. It's only through the types of multi-stakeholder groups like this FACT Alliance that we can create the accelerators that will create the solutions, Greg, to the challenge you just presented.
Thank you. I saw John's hand up.
So, again, we work mostly with smallholder farmers in developing countries, and the way that we go about understanding what support decision makers need is we try to ask them. And early in my career, I think I followed Pete's approach and sort of said, hey, we can tell you about what's going to happen at the end of the century with this or that much uncertainty. And the farmers would look at me and think, why does this guy think that my great-great-grandchildren are still going to be farming? And what do I do in the next growing season? And so we began, this was when I was with USAID, we began flipping the model to think about what are the decision systems that are in place, what are the goals in the country where we're trying to work, and what are the impediments to achieving those goals. And if it's a climate impediment, then we may be able to get some information in place. It may well be a non-climate impediment. It may be a staff shortage or a lack of a computer or something like that. And it's only by breaking down what are the objectives that the country or the community is trying to achieve that you can really begin to understand where there is a problem. And so this calls on, as Theo said, not just physical science or natural science, but also social science. And being able to analyze policies and say, okay, here's what we're trying to achieve, and it's operating without enough information. And so could we introduce a forecast? Most of the work that we do, again, is looking at seasonal outlooks. So the climate forecasts that we produce are meant to align with the growing season or the malaria season if we're working in health. And then understand how are decisions made and what language, as Theo said, is used by the decision maker so that we don't go in and talk to them about probabilities and so forth, but talk in the terms that will resonate with them and ideally fit into whatever decision support systems are already in place. And the best way to get this right is to bring the different communities together and get them talking to each other so that they understand each other, understand what's possible, what may not be possible, and why not, so that they have more confidence in each other and more trust.
Thank you. Anyone else have a comment on that? Or I can. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I guess the question
we'll go to
was.
you, Diane, after. I mean, sorry, we'll go to you, Charlotte, after.
Yeah. So the question was how do we make sure that all these stakeholders can feed into the innovation process? And I think the answer that's come out is talk to them. I think that's the simplest thing, right? Get them involved. That's what we've done in this alliance. We get them involved.
Yeah.
Because only through that co-design of the research can we make the progress. So it's just a simple point.
That's sometimes the simple points are the best. Right. Charlotte, I think I saw you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have said a lot of what I was going to say. I think I only just wanted to add, along with the policymakers and some of the sort of policy environments and how important it is to learn about that, about what are the kind of environments that will facilitate innovation or the pull through of innovation is an important part of when we're thinking about that approach to scale. The other stakeholder that I don't think we brought out is what does the consumer want? I've learned through our agricultural R&D that, fundamentally for farmers, it's really paying close attention to the bottom line. What does it mean about profit margins and so on? I've also learned about how important it is for some aspects of agricultural innovation of really thinking through and understanding what do consumers want. Yeah. What are the kind of products, if something changes the color, it, influences what it looks like in the market, and that means it won't sell. It's not going to take off. It's not to go to scale. So I just wanted to also highlight the importance of getting consumer views when we're thinking about the understanding the landscape in which we're working in.
Right. Thank you, Charlotte. And actually, one of the things you said made me think of the efforts to get consumers to buy ugly fruit. For those in the audience, food waste accounts, we waste about 30% of our food. It's either lost post-harvest in the developing world, and in the developed world, it's usually at the consumer level. If consumers were just to buy ugly fruit, that would be an important step in the right direction. John, I actually said I'd come back to you with a question about uncertainty. So I want to come back to that. I think, especially since you work in the developing world or in the global south, adaptation is very important there. And as we try to get farmers to adapt and as we try to get communities to adapt to the impacts of climate change, they're really feeling already. How can research and how can research collaborations and how can the coalitions like we're building address that, so that recommendations aren't maladaptive? So you don't recommend something that 5 years down the road turns out was an investment that actually puts farmers in a worse condition.
Well, one of the things that we try to do is to align the types of information that we're building the capacity in the meteorological agencies to provide with the timescale of the decisions that are being made most commonly. And on the farm, it's not 5, 10, 100-year decisions, it's seasonal, and they make new decisions and new investments every growing season. And so we try to understand those decision systems and then work closely with the networks that are there to support farmers so that they understand whether they should, how much confidence do we have in a forecast? And we're getting better at enabling the farmer to set a threshold for rainfall or temperature and say that if I don't get so much rain, I'm going to have a problem, and then the forecast can tell them the probability of hitting that threshold. Over time, they will begin to see whether the forecasts are very good. With the meteorological agencies, we go back and assess as time passes. We see whether we were right or wrong 3 months later. And so we are able to go back and verify whether the forecast was good. But really, by working with those support networks and building those bridges between the producers and the users of information, we're able to enable the decision makers to understand how much we know and how confident we are in the information we're providing. And then they can make their own judgment, because the alternative may be to go with no information or go with what they would do every other year. And they know that that's changing. They know that what they did last year or 10 years ago is probably not what's going to happen in the next season. So maybe we give them a little bit better information, and that gives them the confidence to make a decision that they'll be happier with.
Okay. Thanks. Please do, yeah.
Come in, but it strikes me that one of the ways that we could actually accelerate this is figure out how we get that science, that real-time information, to multiple points in the system, in the value chain, that are able to connect that to what's happening on the ground. And again, I think this is a great place where the Fact Alliance can come forward, because we're creating essentially new level real-time data, funneling it through Teo's organization, and his expansive reach to farmers is powerful, bringing it to the companies who are engaged in those value chains to disseminate it real time through their, not just business planning, but all the way through to the folks that they're interacting with on the ground, is a further accelerator. And you start to see the real power of what we've got and what we can create here. So just an exciting build.
Yeah, this is a great point. And through work we've done both in Jamaica and Central America and in other countries, we're able to bring at the farm level farmers, extension agents, and the Met Department together to talk about this. And it gives the farmer the opportunity to ask questions of both the provider of information and the typical support network. In Jamaica, the Met Department, in collaboration with the Ag Extension Service, puts out a bulletin with a seasonal forecast. And by working with the Ag Extension agents, they've tried to characterize the information in different ways that resonates with different types of farmers who like to receive their information in different formats. But it's backed up by texts from the Met agency that go directly to farmers, and then they can respond with questions if they don't understand something. So what's exciting about FACT is the ability to take these pilots or these small-scale things and reach more people rapidly.
Thank you. Teo, and you had a response as well.
Yeah, if you will allow me to put on my selfish hat as a farmer.
Please do.
I can try to formulate what we as farmers expect from policymakers and of scientists.
Sure.
From policymakers, we expect a longer planning horizon. We understand that policymakers, especially politicians, usually plan for the next election. Mm-hmm. But farming is really a multi-generational thing. We need policies that will not only create the environment, but also maintain an environment in which farming can still be sustainable and profitable in 50 years from now. But more than that, we need policies which bring certainty. And if you look at the map again, which Professor Smith showed us, all those hungry countries, in all of those countries, there are issues with the policy environment It's a political thing. In Africa, our neck of the woods, we have everything that money cannot buy. We have about 46% of the underutilized land in the world. The groundwater sources, the best climate. Africa is right in the middle of the globe, half of it north and half of it south. Why we cannot feed ourselves and what needs to change is actually things that money can buy. Is infrastructure, is linkages to markets, is expertise, is technology. And somebody is going to make that investment as soon as there is a policy environment which is good for investment. And then to the scientists, we don't need them to be popular or to be on our side or to be in the public eye. We just need them to be right. We just need them to maintain the integrity of the results.
That actually ties in with the question I was just going to ask you. So, you know, how can we ensure that the science is effectively engaging with the needs of the farmers? How can we ensure that the science is being done in a way that it has a pathway to policy? And this is for anyone, but also, I mean, I'll start with you, Theo, if you've got some thoughts on that.
By simply having the kind of platform which we are launching today, by more interaction, by more discussion around it. As farmers, we often say, don't invite us to dinner, call us to the kitchen. We want to be there where we plan on the mix.
That's great. If anyone has anything to add, feel free to speak up. Pete, I have a question for you. So you talked about how research occurs in silos in your opening. You've joined the FACT Alliance to address that. What do you see as some of the keys to breaking down those silos? I mean, those silos exist for a number of reasons, and breaking them down is not going to be easy.
No. So I think firstly, it's the will to do it. So when multidisciplinarity hasn't been around for forever, right? So I probably only started doing that in the 1990s as well. And that was, you know, the idea of a natural scientist working with a social scientist in those days was unthinkable. And it was difficult. In the same way as we failed with our stakeholders, I think we learned as we failed through engaging because we were talking different languages. And sometimes we were even using the same word to mean different things. So even when we thought we understood each other, we didn't. We had misunderstandings between us. But that's made massive leaps and bounds of progress over the last 20 years. We're now in a position where we don't think twice about natural scientists working with social scientists or working with economists or working with political scientists or specialists in governance. So I think we've got better as we've realized the demand, as we've focused our attention more on questions that need to be solved, the grand challenges, if you like, climate change, feeding people, biodiversity loss. These are the grand challenges that we know that we can't address by ourselves, and we need the other people. I think I've said in the past that we know enough about the natural science that we could almost stop research on it. And, you know, I'm slitting my own throat to say that. I don't think that's really quite the case. I'm overstating it for emphasis. But actually what we really need are the social scientists to work out, well, if this is so great, why aren't farmers adopting it? Why aren't consumers preferring it? You know, those are the sorts of things that we need to answer. I don't have the skills to do that, but people in the Alliance do.
And that comes back to Charlotte's point about consumer preference. And I mean, I think, you know, anyone who's spent enough time working in agriculture knows that agricultural fields are literally littered with the next big technological innovation that was supposed to fix everything. You know, the questions of why that doesn't work are some of these questions that we're trying to answer. Charlotte, I have a question for you. What are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for supporting climate-smart food systems innovations?
Sorry, my microphone had a problem. I mean, I think I touched on this a little when we kicked off. I mean, I do think that issue of sufficient investment is one that's really important. You know, it's estimated that it's about 60 billion US is spent on innovation in the global South. And only 7% of that is focused on sustainable agricultural techniques. That clearly is insufficient. I think that challenge of actually making real what we're talking about, you know, how do we have public-private partnerships, for example, that bring together farmers groups with the private sector that are able to really bring the different skills and expertise to speed up and ensure that we can scale up solutions quickly. You know, it's easier said than done. I think there are some good examples of it, but it's not necessarily an established way of working, an established form of partnership. And I think that combination of government money, public sector money, and private sector money, how do you balance out risk, de-risk the private sector to bring them in by using public sector money, for example, is one of the areas that we need to be ensuring that we're doing. And I mean, and that's what we're very much aiming to do in our own investments in agricultural R&D and pull through. But again, there's a whole lot of nuance to how to actually make that work. I think we are also facing new challenges that we need to again engage with. You know, if I look at our own history of investment in agricultural R&D, you know, we've had big pushes, for example, on how do we improve resilience to disease, different types of diseases, for example. How do we improve nutritional output from agriculture? How do we ensure we can reach the most marginalized with improved technologies? We're now adding on the climate resilience to all of those other challenges. So for me, when we're thinking forward, it's those multiple agendas, and how do we ensure that we're increasing and being able to do food production in a way that doesn't impact and that reduces the impact on changes in land use and on impacts on biodiversity. So to me, that part of the big challenge as we move forward is the combination of agendas that essentially we need to be making progress on if we are really going to respond to the range of global threats that the world faces, and particularly the global South, and particularly the most vulnerable in the global South. And we should be really ambitious about that. We're being very ambitious about that in COP and in the announcements and commitments that the world is making. But that agenda needs everybody here to be playing a central role. And if anything, us all moving out of our silos, all moving out of our territories and really sort of joining forces coming out of COP to really make significant progress if we are going to hit the targets that we're setting ourselves by 2030.
Thank you. So we are already almost out of time. So I want to thank the audience for joining us virtually. And it's, you know, this COP26 in the middle of the ongoing pandemic has created a series of challenges, which is why we're all virtual. And thank you, Charlotte, for phoning in. I want to thank all of you for your input and for your generosity of your time and for your engagement in the FACT Alliance. I think this is really important. And we're looking forward to continue to build this. I also want to thank the members of the FACT Alliance. It's important to note that there's 16 research institutions that are involved, spanning all six farmable continents, at least for now. And there's a growing list of stakeholder organizations that are involved in this too. So I think it's really important to highlight that. We don't have the ability to put up a slide, so I'm going to give you the web address for the FACT Alliance right now, and I'll give you my email address if you have questions. So the website address is JWAFS, that's jwafs.mit.edu/alliance. And you can also email me at sixt, that's SIXT, @mit.edu. Thank you again to everyone. I really enjoyed this conversation. Everyone enjoy your weekend. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Greg.